There is a particular sound a keep makes when a king speaks a word he cannot take back. It is not a loud sound. It is the sound of 40 witnesses drawing breath at once and not releasing it, and the woman standing at the center of the floor hears it the way she hears her own pulse, steady, low, and impossible to ignore. She did not cry. 3 years later, the court would remember that most of all. He said the word, exile, and she stood with her hands loose at her sides and her chin level, and the only thing that moved was the bond mark beneath her linen sleeve, which heated once, violently, and then went cold as stone. She did not look at him when she left. She looked at the door and she walked through it, and the pack parted for her the way water parts for a blade. No one came after her. Not that night. Not for 3 years. What the pack did not know, what the court did not see, was what the bond had already chosen. It had chosen her the morning she arrived at this keep as a healer's apprentice at 19, in a world that had not yet decided what to do with her. It had chosen her 3 times in the years that followed, in ways she had called fever and exhaustion and the tricks of cold air on bare skin. The bond is not a patient thing when it is denied, and it is not silent. This is the story of what happens when a king runs out of tincture. If you have stayed for this kind of story before, you know what patience costs. Stay close. This one pays. The winter of year 1249 settled over the Veldrath borderlands like a hand pressing down, and in the small settlement of Thornwatch, where the pack maps ended and the old warden trails began, Mira had learned to read cold the way she had once read anatomy charts. As information, not complaint. She had been at Thornwatch for 3 years, 3 months, and 4 days. Not because she counted, she did not count, but because Selah, the herbalist who had taken her in off a frozen road without asking a single question, had carved a small mark into the doorpost each month the way certain people mark the passing of difficult things. Mira had noticed the marks. She had not commented on them. Selah was 81 years old and had earned every opinion she held. The morning the soldiers came, Mira was at the workbench stripping the dry leaves from a bundle of winter hazel, her fingers moving with the particular economy of someone who does not need to look at what her hands are doing. The bond mark on her left shoulder was wrapped in a strip of soft linen, as it was every morning, as it had been every morning for 3 years. It was a discipline, not a concealment. Or so she told herself. She had no one to conceal it from in Thornwatch. There were perhaps 60 souls in the settlement, most of them elderly or too young to care about the politics of a keep 2 days' ride east, and old Devon, the border warden who shared a wall with Selah's cottage, had known her father and asked no questions either. She heard the horses before she saw them. 4 mounts, heavily laden for winter travel, the distinctive iron-shod clop of keep cavalry on frozen ground. Selah appeared in the doorway between the workroom and the kitchen, a clay pot in her hand, and looked at Mira with the expression of someone who has been quietly anticipating something unpleasant for a long time. "You'll want your cloak," Selah said. "The good one." Mira set down the winter hazel. The soldier who came to the door was young, with the careful posture of someone following precise instructions about how to conduct himself. He did not meet her eyes when he handed over the parchment. The seal was Calder's, the iron circle with the wolf's print at the center, black wax pressed hard. She did not open it immediately. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of the wax seal against her thumb, and noticed that her hands were entirely steady. Lord Heron's handwriting was inside, above Calder's pressed mark. Brief. "The king requests your presence at Veldrath Keep on a matter concerning the welfare of the pack. The night of the still moon falls in 5 days. Your presence is required before it." She had to read the line twice to understand the shape of the trap it described, because the night of the still moon was the only night in the year when the bond confirmation rite could be performed, and in 5 days Heron intended to confirm Lady Vessa as Luna before the full assembly. She looked at the soldier. "What happens if I do not come?" He looked at his boots. I was told to tell you that the Warden settlement of Thornwatch is registered under the Veldrath Pact Charter. That renewal comes before the Winter Council. There it was. 60 souls whose shelter was a line on a document. Mira folded the parchment and put it in her apron pocket. She went back inside, where Sella was still standing with the clay pot and an expression that had not changed. How long? Sella asked. 5 days. Sella set the pot down. She moved to the small chest by the wall and took out the folded dark wool cloak, the one with the stitched hem that Mira had repaired twice. She held it out without speaking, and Mira took it. And for a moment they stood in the cold kitchen with the smell of wood ash and dried herbs between them, and neither said the thing they were both thinking. Come back, Sela said finally. It was not a request. Yes, Mira said. That was not a promise. It was a statement of intent, which was the most honest thing she could offer. The road to Veldrath was 2 days through frost-hardened pine country, and Ryan rode beside her for most of it. She recognized him. Ryan was the king's second, a compact, quiet man with gray at his temples who had been Calder's shadow for 6 years. He did not speak about the purpose of the journey. He did not speak about much. But on the second afternoon, when the sky had gone, the flat white of approaching snow, and the horses were moving faster to beat the weather, he said, without looking at her, "He does not know I was the one who drafted the route." She waited. He knows the recall order went out. He signed it. He did not know I wrote the route to pass through Thornwatch, rather than the southern settlement where Heron told him you'd been placed. Mira looked at the frost-gray trees. You could have told me that before I agreed to come. You would have come regardless, Ryan said. The charter threat was real. I wanted you to know there is at least one honest man inside those walls. She thought about that for a long time while the horses moved and the cold settled deeper into the afternoon. Veldrath Keep rose out of the valley in the early morning of the 5th day, gray stone against a sky that was still the dark blue of pre-dawn, the torches at the gatehouse making 2 small warm points in all that cold. The outer walls were as she remembered them. The same worn battlements, the same iron-banded gates standing open to morning traffic, the same layered smell of horse and frost and wood smoke that any large keep carries in deep winter. She had spent 4 years of her life inside those walls. She had learned the names of the herbs that grew in the south garden, and which flagstones tilted in the lower corridor, and which hinges on the medicine room door announced themselves every time. She had walked out of those walls on a winter morning 3 years ago, and had not looked back. And she had told herself in the years since that the not looking back was a choice she had finished making. The mark under her linen wrap said otherwise. Mira had last seen the keep from this angle 3 years ago, walking away in the other direction, and the sight of it now did something to the mark beneath her sleeve that she registered and did not analyze. The courtyard was occupied when they arrived. A training bout in progress near the far wall, 2 soldiers and a third figure standing to the side, watching. And the air changed before she identified him because her body knew the shape of his attention, the way it knew the shape of a doorframe she had walked through 100 times. Calder. He was not looking at her. He was watching the bout. But his shoulders shifted by a fraction when the horses came under the gate arch, and the soldier nearest him noticed. And Ryan noticed. And Mira noticed. And she thought that 3 years was a long time to maintain a suppression. She did not speak to him in the courtyard. He did not speak to her. He turned back to the bout after that single fractional shift, and a guard led her to the guest corridor on the east side of the keep, and the door closed, and she sat on the edge of the stone bench and unwrapped the linen from her shoulder and looked at the mark. It was brighter than it had been last week. It was considerably brighter than it had been last year. She wrapped it again, slowly, and tucked the end under with the careful pressure of someone who has done this so many times, the motion has become thoughtless. and she sat in the cold room and thought about the night of the still moon, which was now 3 days away. Ryan came that evening with a tray of food and a careful expression. "He has been taking night moss root," he said. He did not sit down. He stood near the door as if he expected to need to leave quickly. "Monthly, since a few weeks after you left. Ground tincture, high concentration. I found the supply in his private stores about 8 months ago." Mira looked at the tray. Night moss root was a suppressant old pack medicine used in cases of severed bonds or delayed recognition to dull the wolf's compulsion while a proper resolution was arranged. It was not dangerous in short use. In monthly doses for 3 years, it was a slow erosion of the wolf's ability to distinguish anything at all. She had read about it in Sella's oldest herbalist texts, the ones written in cramped old script that took 3 passes to decipher. She had not expected to find the knowledge useful. "How often has the wolf broken through?" she asked. Ryan's jaw tightened. 3 times in the last 2 months. He contained it each time. The last one was 4 days ago. She sat very still with that information. "Heron knows?" she asked. "Heron arranged the tincture supply," Ryan said quietly. "He has a physician on staff who has been providing it since the 2nd month. I believe he told the king it was a general nerve-steadying compound. Calder is not a fool, but he trusted Heron for 12 years. Old habits take time to examine." Mira looked at the bond mark through the linen, which she could not actually see, but which she felt as a point of warmth against the cold of the room, and understood that Heron had put her in exile to fracture the bond, and when the bond refused to fracture, he had chosen a slower method. 3 years of grinding it down from the inside. "What does Heron intend for the night of the still moon?" she asked, though she had already assembled most of it. Vesa confirmed as Luna at the right. "You charged formally with cursing the king's wolf, the deterioration framed as evidence of a dark bond you placed before your exile. Execution carried out before sunrise so the rite can proceed uncomplicated." Ryan paused. "He told 3 council members this plan this morning in the East Wing. I was behind the storage alcove." The trap was elegant. She granted Heron that. If Calder was deteriorating because of the suppressed bond, and Mira was charged with causing the deterioration through a planted curse, and the rite was performed before Calder's wolf broke through again, then Vesa would be confirmed, and the bond would be legally severed under pack law, and the king would have no recourse. He would not even know what had been done to him. "He does not know about the tincture," Mira said. "No. Does he know about me? That I am here? In this room?" "He signed the recall order. He knows you are somewhere in the keep." Ryan's expression was difficult to read in the low light. "He has walked past this corridor twice since this evening's meal." She let that sit in the air between them without comment. After Ryan left, she lay on the stone bench with her cloak over her and listened to the keep settle around her and thought about what it meant that he had walked past this corridor twice. She had been telling herself for 3 years that the bond was a biological fact, neutral as weather, carrying no particular message beyond what her body chose to make of it. She had been telling herself that his silence during those 3 years meant what it looked like. He had weighed the bond against the political cost and found the bond insufficient. That story was harder to hold here, in this building, with the mark brighter than it had been in months, and the information that he had been slowly poisoned by the man who put her in exile, and that his wolf had broken through 3 times in recent weeks, and had not done so in the 3 years before. She pulled the cloak tighter and did not sleep until well past midnight. The 3rd day was ordinary in the way that days before executions are ordinary. The light came in the same way, the bells rang at the same hours. The corridor outside her door carried the same sounds of bootsteps and voices in the middle distance. Mira was allowed to move within the East Wing and the adjacent courtyard, a restriction stated quietly by the guard outside her door, that she understood as Ryan's arrangement rather than Heron's. She spent the morning in the East courtyard, walking the perimeter to keep the cold out of her joints, and she was on the second circuit when she heard the sound. It was not a loud sound. It was the sound a man makes when he is trying very hard not to make any sound at all, and it came from the narrow passage between the east wing and the storage annex, which was not a place anyone had reason to be at this hour. She stopped. She looked at the passage entrance. She went in. Calder was on his knees against the far wall with one hand pressed to the stone and the other at his own chest and his head down, and the air around him was wrong, carrying a heat that had nothing to do with the cold stone corridor. His wolf was pushing. She could feel it even from here, a pressure in the air like the moment before a storm breaks, and the bond mark beneath her linen sleeve went from warm to burning in the space of a single breath. He heard her enter. His head came up. In the gray light of the passage, his eyes were not fully his. A gold rim at the edge, the wolf's color, bleeding into the dark iris. His expression was a thing she had no adequate word for. Not surprise, not anger, something prior to both of those. "Go back," he said. His voice was wrong, rougher than it should have been, caught somewhere between the man's register and the wolf's deeper pitch. "No," Mira said. She crossed to him and went to her knees on the stone and put both hands, bare, against his chest, and the bond ignited. There is no other word for it. It did not gradually warm. It did not politely announce itself. The mark on her shoulder went from burning to blazing in the space of a heartbeat, and through her palms she felt the answer from his side. A pulse of recognition so strong it moved through her sternum like a struck bell, and his wolf went entirely still, not subdued. Still, the way a great animal goes still when it has found the thing it was looking for. He was looking at her. She kept her hands where they were. Her heart was loud in her ears. She could feel the exact shape of the bond between them, which she had spent 3 years pretending had an explanation other than what it was, and she understood that there was no way to go back from this. Not from her side. She suspected not from his either. "There is night moss root in your private stores," she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her only briefly. "Supplied by Heron's physician. You have been taking it for 3 years. She paused. "So have I been taking it, in a form, without knowing what it was. Seela used it in my first winter at Thornwatch in a nerve tea she gave me for the cold. I did not connect the name until last night." His hands were not entirely still. She could feel the tremor in his chest against her palms. "I thought it was a general compound," he said. "I know. I thought you." He stopped. She waited. "I thought if I could manage the recognition, I could protect you. Heron had the votes. He had the evidence. I could not." He stopped again, and the gold at the edge of his eyes receded slightly as the wolf quieted. "That is not an explanation." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She did not move her hands. After a moment, he brought his own hand up and pressed it over hers. Not hard, just the weight of his palm on her knuckles. And they stayed like that in the cold passage for a long time without speaking, while the bond settled between them like a thing that had been waiting a very long time to be allowed to rest. She was back in the east wing before the midday bell, and he was at his council table before the hour after that, and nothing about the surface of the keep had changed. But the mark on her shoulder had gone from burning to a steady heat that she recognized as a different kind of fire than what she had spent 3 years managing. She was careful not to look at it directly. There was still tonight to survive. What she had not yet learned was that Ryan had spent the previous night in the keep's records room with a sealed lantern and a precise knowledge of where Heron's private correspondence was filed. Calder found her that evening, in the small garden off the east courtyard, where the last frost-hardened lavender still stood in rows from someone's better season. He came alone, without a guard, which was unusual enough that she stopped and turned when she heard the gate. He looked at her for a moment in the gray dusk light, and then looked at the lavender as if it had become interesting to him. He had the careful stillness of a man who has recently spent a great deal of effort containing something and is not entirely certain how much energy he has left for it. "I want you to understand that I know what I did," he said. "Not a general understanding, the specific accounting of it." She waited. "I let him build the case. I had doubts. I chose not to act on them because acting on them would have required me to name what the bond was in open court, and naming it would have exposed you to different dangers than the ones I thought I could manage." He paused. "I was wrong about which dangers were manageable." "Yes," she said, "that is the whole of it." She looked at him in the dusk and understood that he was not asking for absolution. He is handing her the accounting flat because he owes it to her and because he is not a man who dresses up debts in softer language. "I know why you made the choice," she said. "I understand the arithmetic of it. Understanding a choice and forgiving it are different things." She let that settle. "I have not decided yet which one I am going to do." Something shifted in his face. "That is more than I expected." "I know," she said. She went back inside before the cold fully arrived, and she sat in the east room for a long time listening to the keep, and she thought about the mark on her shoulder, and the night moss root in his stores, and the 9 pages Rian had mentioned in passing that afternoon, with the careful expression of a man delivering information he believed would matter before the night was out. The night of the still moon rose clear and frozen, which was unusual for the Veldrath Valley in deep winter, and the assembly in the great hall was 47 wolves, which was the full count of the inner court and the council, and the 3 visiting alphas from the southern packs who had come for the bond confirmation rite. Heron had arranged the gallery torches to face inward, so the light fell in a warm ring around the central floor and the dais, and anyone standing outside that ring would be in relative shadow. Mira was standing in shadow. She had been brought to the hall by 2 guards an hour before the rite was scheduled to begin. She had not been told she was being brought before an execution platform. She had been told she was required for a formal inquiry into the king's health, which was the phrasing Heron had used, and which was accurate only in the sense that all traps are accurate in their stated terms if you read them narrowly enough. The inquiry was Heron's opening move. He stood at the head of the dais in his council robes, dark green with the embroidered chain, and spoke for 11 minutes about the king's deteriorating wolf bond and the evidence of a severed curse. And then he named her, loudly, in the middle of the assembled 47. The woman Mira, formerly of the healer's rank, exiled 3 years past for poisoning the beta's pup, who now stands accused of placing a bond curse on our king before her exile, a curse that has been consuming his wolf in the years since. He paused with the pause of a man who has rehearsed this. The penalty for such a crime, under the old statutes which were never formally struck, is death before sunrise, to clear the king's bond for the right. 47 wolves in a gallery will make a particular sound when 47 minds are working through the same calculation at the same time. It is not quite silence and not quite speech. Mira stood in the shadow at the floor's edge and felt the bond mark blazing through her linen wrap and thought about the accounting. 5 days ride, 2 days road, 3 days in this keep, and it came to this floor, this light, this man's precise and patient cruelty. Calder was at the head table. He had not moved. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and she could see, in the distance and the uneven torchlight, that the gold was back at the edge of his eyes. And she understood with the cold clarity of someone reading a complicated text and arriving at the final line that the night moss root had run out. He had taken his last dose the night before her arrival, 5 days ago. The suppression was failing in real time, and Heron, in his precision, did not know it. "I have not placed any curse," Mira said. Her voice carried clearly in the hall. "I have never, in any form, worked against the pack's welfare." Her denial, Heron said, turning to the assembly with the confidence of a man who has already counted his votes, was anticipated. Lord Heron. That was Ryan's voice, from the gallery to the left, and the sound of it moved through the hall differently than Heron's voice, quieter and without performance. I would like to submit 9 pages of correspondence before the assembly proceeds. The silence this time was total. Ryan descended from the gallery with the pages in his hand, sealed in red cord, and laid them on the council table in the torchlight where the 3 visiting alphas could see them. 9 pages in the hand of Heron's own private seer, who had died of fever 2 years ago, and whose records had remained in Heron's locked correspondence chest for the duration. The pages detailed, in the seer's own cramped notation, the original reading of the King's Bond, performed secretly at Heron's request in the 2nd year of Mira's employment, which had confirmed the bond as genuine, as primordial, as belonging to the category of bonds the old texts called irrevocable, and the subsequent arrangement Heron had made, in writing, for the bond to be suppressed by means of a tincture administered without the king's full knowledge of its nature or its source. 12 years Heron had held the council. He had 12 years of calculating the angle of every room. He saw the visiting alphas reading the pages, and he saw the 3 council members he had trusted with the execution plan looking at their own hands, and he understood in that moment that the vote he had counted was no longer the vote he had. "These pages are forgeries," Heron said. His voice was still controlled, still precisely measured. "Produced by a man with a personal loyalty to a discredited healer." "They bear your seal," Ryan said, "the one you use for private correspondence. I recognize it because I have seen it on 14 communications in the last 2 years." Ryan speaks true. That was old Devon's voice, which nobody expected, because old Devon was not a member of this court. He was standing at the back of the gallery in a border warden's gray coat, and beside him was a document that Mira had not known he was carrying into this hall, and the document bore a seal that was older than Heron's council tenure by 40 years. "I was a registry keeper before I was a warden. I held the original lineage records for the Veldrath Pack when Lord Heron's predecessor struck the Caldenvault name from the nobility register. These are those records. The woman Mira is of that line. The bond is not a curse. It is a recognition the hierarchy has spent 12 years paying to prevent." The hall was not silent. It was the opposite of silent, which is a particular quality of sound that moves through a large stone room and carries the weight of 47 people arriving at the same conclusion at different speeds. Heron moved first. He was not a wolf, not in the way the pack understood the word, but he had 12 years of political instinct, and he chose the fastest path to the door, and he was nearly at the passage arch when Calder stood. The hall changed. The torches did not flicker. The stone did not shake. But the air in the hall became a different kind of air, the way air changes in the moment before a storm breaks, not with wind, but with a pressure that the body reads, before the mind catches up. Calder had been still at the head table for the length of Heron's speech, and Ryan's pages, and old Devon's records, still with the stillness of a man who was holding something very large in a very small space, and when he stood, he stopped holding it. The 47 wolves in the gallery felt their knees want to bend. 4 of them did not resist the impulse. Heron stopped at the arch. "You have held my counsel for 12 years, Calder said. He was not shouting. He did not need to shout. "You administered a compound to me for 3 years under a false description. You fabricated the charges that sent her out of this keep. You have been working for 12 years to prevent me from knowing what my own wolf knows." Heron turned, and for a moment the calculation in his face was still running, still looking for the angle, and then it stopped, because there was no angle. The pages were on the table. The seal was his. The seer's hand was unmistakable to the 3 people in this assembly who had received correspondence from her, and 2 of them were currently looking at Heron with the expression of men who have just understood what they were asked to participate in. The pack charter allows for a challenge of evidence before. No, Calder said. He crossed the floor. Heron did not run a second time. He was a calculating man, and his calculations had told him for 12 years that the king would always choose the political weight of the council over the personal weight of a bond, and that calculation had not accounted for the night moss being gone for 5 days, and it had not accounted for Ryan, and it had not accounted for the fact that there are things a man can suppress for 3 years and 3 months and 4 days without the suppression becoming permanent. Calder's hand was at Heron's throat for exactly as long as it needed to be. It was not prolonged. It was not performed. The snapping sound was audible in the upper gallery. The body went down. The hall was very still. Mira stood at the edge of the torchlight and felt the bond mark pulsing against her shoulder and watched the hall process what had just happened. The 3 visiting alphas were on their feet. The council members who had known about the execution plan were very carefully not moving. Lady Vessa, who had been standing at the far edge of the dais in the deep green of her confirmation gown, sat down on the nearest bench with a sound that was not quite a sob, and one of the other women, a serving woman, moved to her side, and Mira noted without satisfaction that Vessa's face was the face of someone who had been carrying a weight she had not chosen and had been waiting for it to be set down. Calder turned. He crossed the floor back toward her, and the assembly watched, and the 47 wolves stood in the torchlight as he stopped in front of her, and he was looking at her the way he had looked at her in the gray passage beside the east wing when both his hands were occupied with not coming apart, with the gold fully in his eyes now, not bleeding, settled, the wolf entirely present. He went to one knee on the stone floor of the same hall where he had said the word exile 3 years ago, before these same assembled wolves, on the same dais where Heron had just declared her sentence. The hall did not move. She was never a curse, Calder said, to the assembly and not to her, because she already knew it. She was the only thing keeping me. He was still looking at her. She thought about 3 years. She thought about the road to Thornwatch in the dark, and Sella's marks on the doorpost, and the linen wrapping she put on every morning, and the night she had decided to stop counting the months because counting them implied she was waiting for something she had decided not to wait for. She thought about the passage in the east wing where she had put her bare hands on his chest and felt the bell strike of a recognition she had been calling something else for 3 years. She reached out and put her hand on the side of his face and held it there for a moment, and the bond settled fully between them for the first time, unobstructed, without night moss root or exile, or the weight of a court watching for weakness. It was a large feeling. She had known it would be. "Get up," she said quietly. "We have work to do." She was thinking about Vessa, who needed someone to explain that she was free from whatever hold Heron had maintained over her family, and the council members who needed to be assessed individually, and old Davin's documents that needed to be formally entered into the pack registry, and the 9 pages that needed to be properly archived so that Heron's method could never be replicated. She was thinking practically, because that was what she did, and she understood, watching his expression change as he rose, that this was one of the things the bond had recognized about her. Not her lineage, which she had not known about. Not her station, which she had never had. The specific quality of steadiness that did not dissolve when the thing you were steady for finally arrived. The bond confirmation rite did not happen on the night of the still moon. There was too much else to do. The rite was rescheduled for the following week, with the full assembly present and the records formally entered, and the visiting alphas formally informed of what had occurred. And when it happened, it was not a ceremony about a political position. It was a ceremony about what the pack's oldest bond recognition texts described in plain terms, which was that the wolf does not choose by bloodline or by rank, but by the specific gravity of a person's interior, the quality that cannot be fabricated or purchased, and that when it chooses, it does not reconsider. 47 wolves were in the gallery again. More had come from the outer settlements, from the border positions. Sella was in the front row, which Ryan had arranged without being asked, in her best gray coat with the embroidered hem, standing very straight with her hands folded at her waist. She watched the right with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time and is not going to diminish the occasion by showing all of what they feel. When it was done, when the mark had been officially read by the bond keeper and the proclamation spoken and the assembly had bent their knees, Mira found herself looking at Sela in the front row, and Sela gave her a small, deliberate nod, the kind of nod that carries a meaning without words. I told you to come back. And you did. And that is the whole of what I required. The winter pressed on for 6 more weeks after that. The roads to Thornwatch were clear by early spring, and Sela's marks on the doorpost remained exactly as she had carved them, and in the east wing of the Veldrath Keep, on the table by the window where the morning light came in the strongest, sat a small clay pot of winter hazel that someone had placed there during the first week without comment. It stayed there. It was the right kind of detail for a room that had become somewhere a person intended to remain.